Justin Rolat reporting there. The time now is 9:07. There's really an air of unreality about our lives at the moment, isn't there? As if we've dreamed our way into a strange dystopia, a world which could have come from the pages of a science fiction novel. Some have drawn comparisons between Corona Britain and the pages of J.G. Ballard. We can talk now to Will Self, author of most recently Will Self, amongst many other books, of course, who knew J.G. Ballard and actually describes him as his hero. Good morning.
Good morning.
Do you think that the world in which we find ourselves, do you think this is something that in a way was anticipated by Ballard?
Absolutely, 100% anticipated. I mean, Ballard was always viewed, in his lifetime was viewed as a writer with a strong prognosticatory ability. His novel Crash, written in the late 60s, seemed to foretell the kind of celebrity culture and the vampirism of the media to an untold extent. He seemed to anticipate our ecological environmental crises with a string of books like The Drought, also in the 60s and into the 1970s, and the kind of social dislocation we seem to be seeing at the moment can seem to be foreshadowed by something like his book High Rise as well.
And you're going
in
to
a string of late novels, I may say, his final tetralogy, he specifically imagined Britain beset by these kinds of problems, these kinds of mass NOE, strange psychotic dislocations, yeah.
And you get a sense of one of those dislocations in an extract that you're going to read for us. It's from a short story, isn't it, from 1977. So just explain why you've chosen this passage and then do read it for us.
It's from a story called The Intensive Care Unit that anticipates a future in which nobody is in physical contact with one another. So both the title and the premise of the story seem particularly applicable to our own era. But I think the point I'd like to make before I read the extract is that Ballard's prognostications are not kind of directly accurate. This is going to happen in this particular way. What he understood was he created something he called inner space, and he understood that human affairs were going to be beset by these strange interrelations between mass mediatization and natural phenomena. And that's, of course, what we're witnessing with the COVID pandemic. Okay, so I'll read you the extract, Martha, from J.G. Ballard's Intensive Care. Throughout my entire life, I reflected, I had never once seen, let alone touched, another human being. Whom better to begin with than my own wife and children? Tentatively, I raised the suggestion with Margaret, and I was delighted when she agreed. What an odd but marvellous idea! Why on earth has no one suggested it before? We decided instantly that the archaic interdiction against meeting another human being deserved simply to be ignored. Unhappily, for reasons I failed to understand at the time, our first meeting was not a success. To avoid confusing the children, we deliberately restricted the first encounter to ourselves. I remember the days of anticipation as we made preparations for Margaret's journey, an elaborate undertaking for people rarely travelled, except at the speed of the television signal. An hour before she arrived, I disconnected the complex security precautions that sealed my house from the world outside. The electronic alarm signals, steel grills, and gas-tight doors. At last, the bell rang. Standing by the internal portcullis at the end of the entrance hall, I released the magnetic catches on the front door. A few seconds later, the figure of a small, narrow-shouldered woman stepped into the hall. Although she was over 20 feet from me, I could see her clearly, but I almost failed to realize that this was the wife to whom I had been married for 10 years. Neither of us was wearing makeup. Without its cosmetic mask, Margaret's face seemed pasty and unhealthy, and the movements of her white hands were nervous and unsettled. I was struck by her advanced age, and above all, by her small size. For years, I had known Margaret as a huge close-up on one or other of the large television screens in the house. Even in long shot, she was usually larger than this hunched and diminutive woman hovering at the end of the hall. It was difficult to believe that I had ever been excited by her empty breasts and narrow thighs.
Will Self there, reading J.G. Ballard.
Brings us to 2 minutes to 9. Our editors today, Terry Neal and Richard Crook. The team in the studio, by the way, Rob Fanner and Wei Dong Ling.